Hey, family. Good evening, and good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is when you view this. We are live here on Moral Monday, and I'm pleased to be coming to you once again, doing what it is that we do. I have the unenviable task, I guess, in some ways, and also in other ways, I'm just peachy keen to be able to share this platform and the technology that it takes to do it. I don't know how it works, but I'm so glad it works. And to be in conversation, as I say often, with some of the brightest, the smartest, the most intriguing folk across this country, and in fact across the world. And many of them are friends of mine, people that I know and or I've met along the journey. And tonight is no different. Our guest tonight, I've been excited. One, that he said yes, that he would come on, but two, I've been excited and to talk to him and get the opportunity to chop it up a little bit with him. I've watched him from afar. He is distinguished amongst us as an African-American scholar and a teacher. This brother's done all of his work. He's a Morehouse man, and then I believe he hails from Chicago, right? He has some Chicago roots, right? I think that's true. If it's not, he'll correct me. But I just want to say we came here 25 years ago from Chicago, South Side, and then did both his master's work and PhD work out in Indiana, and then came out here to New England, landed on Plymouth Rock, as he might say. Oh boy. And I'm gonna ask you in a minute. You know, I can tell you my experience here and the experience of a number of others who lived in other places, and to come here and have the experience of doing the work that we do with our people. This is a different kind of place, and I can say that unequivocally, that this place is a place and that I've come to love, and I've certainly come to call it home. Doc now is the professor of history and the founding director of the Center for the Study of Popular Music. I want to get into that. I want to talk a little bit about how that all developed, how that got started. It did a bunch of different kinds of things at University of Connecticut, affectionately known as UConn Stores. UConn, known across the world for basketball players, of all things, but basketball teams here. When I arrived here 25 years ago, Doc, they told me, "You like college basketball?" I said, "Well, yeah, okay." He said, "That's all we know is college basketball. Don't ask us about football, but basketball we know." And within a few years of our arrival, both the men's and the women's teams won national champions. And then there was one year that they won the national championship this same year. So we had 2 downtown Hartford celebrations that particular year. I am pleased to have our new friend and brother who said yes to come on our show and chop it up, Dr. Jeffrey OG Ogbar. Come on and greet our people tonight, brother. Let me bring you in.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Bishop Selders. And I want to say that your introduction cracked me up when you got to the Plymouth Rock part. I think I had to mute myself because I'm not sure if you can hear me in the green room, but I was cracking up. And so, yeah, of course, I'm thinking about Malcolm X and everything. But yeah, thank you very much for being here, for inviting me here, and very pleased to be here.
Yeah, and of course, that's yeah. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. That's a fact.
Exactly. So a clarification. My wife thinks that Chicago is a much cooler city than LA, where I was born in Chicago, raised in LA, and she would tell people her husband's from Chicago because she thinks Chicago is cooler than LA. But
I got you.
I finished first grade in Compton and second grade in the LA Unified School District all the way through high school. And I'm a Dodgers fan. I'm a Lakers fan. So I'm an Angelino. But I go to Chicago actually more than I go to LA since I went to college. Actually, I went to Atlanta. I've gone to Chicago probably literally maybe 10 times as more frequently than I've gone to Los Angeles. So Chicago is a second home in many ways. In some ways, a first home.
I understand. You're born there, but you really are an LA kid. You're LA.
Yeah. I can't. I'm my developmental years were in Los Angeles, and when I see movies and TV shows, and I feel kind of estranged from LA sometimes. But I went back to LA in 23. I went to a Dodgers game. I hung out in LA, downtown LA. I went to my old neighborhood. I mean, the sentimental connections to LA just came back up, and I didn't even know they were there. They were latent, and I just I leaned into my Angelino identity in a way that I didn't even think I still had. And so it's there. I mean, I knew I love the Dodgers, but that seemed to be it. But no, it's much more than just sports.
Boy, you got a beast of a player. That boy can pitch and hit that ball.
And what's so crazy about Shohei Ohtani is that he is not just like people are calling him a generational player, right? But you have to think that he's done something that people, since baseball has been professionalized in over 130 years, he's doing what nobody has ever done before. He's not even just generational was too diminutive of a descriptor. I mean, he is really, when you talk about greatness, this is something that we get a chance to live through the only person of thousands of people who come through MLB, the only person to do 50-50, 50 home runs at least and 50 stolen bases, to pitch and strike out 10 players and hit 3 home runs in the same game. He's doing stuff that people have not done in the history of the game. And so this is when people talk about, I saw Jackie Robinson, or I saw Babe Ruth, or I saw Cy Young, or Satchel Paige, people will say, I saw Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah. And I'm from St. Louis. So I got to see Bob Gibson.
Mm-hmm. You saw Bob Gibson?
I did. I saw him play. Those are my years. Joe Torre, Lou Brock, Kirk Flood.
Kirk Flood changed the game.
Steve Carlton, Steve McCarvey, these were players that today, Kirk Flood changed the game.
Changed the game. Yeah.
In many ways,
free agency and all that.
The free agency and all that. So listen, we can talk baseball all night. But listen, I want to and listen, hold that, because I may call you back, and we just go right down that road, because in fact, part of what I wanted to talk to you about, and this is related to it, is African American history and what it means to be in this moment and think back to history. I said to you before we came on that in another lifetime, I was a history professor. I know I was. Somehow, and some residue has stayed with me. I've done most of my academic work in theological education, and of course, I'm a pastor and a preacher. I'm third generation, classically trained Pentecostal preacher. But for real, those who know me, I talk way too long about old stuff, about what happened back then, back when, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that somewhat overwhelmed me when we arrived here in New England 25 years ago with my wife and I and our children, was the sense of I don't want to call it oldness, but the sense that things here have histories that date back, to the 18th century. And even further, I would be visiting churches that got their starts in the 17th century, the 1600s. 300 and 400 year history, some of these places and spaces. So I'm forever amazed, one, that there's still some understanding that this place and people in this place have that long trajectory. That's one. But two, when we landed here in Hartford in particular, I asked the question, as I do everywhere I travel all over the world, where are the Black people? Where would they have been? Where would they have lived? What are the things that they did, that they worked on, the institutions that they built? Where are those connections? And I was pleasantly surprised. I'll say this, my beloved, when the call came with the opportunity to move here, she said, "Are there Black people in Harvard?" And we giggled about that, because as a Midwesterner, when we think of New England, I thought of, from my era, I thought of Peyton Place, the Stepford Wives, those were the spaces and places. And I didn't think of, color in that particular kind of way, in a way that I would think about that in other places in this country. And then when we arrived here, I got to experiencing some of the institutions, the oldest of any of our African American churches, for example, are in this region. The oldest of some of our I would say social clubs have some roots here in the Northeast. The beginning of denominations have their roots here, and even if in fact they didn't start here, their growth came here. And so I'm fascinated. It's led me on a trajectory to think about Black history in this region in a particular kind of way. And so I'm passionate about it, and excited to have you here to talk a little bit about history, and to note and ask this question as we begin this conversation in earnest. When you think about history and this moment, so the history and this current moment we're in.
Mm-hmm.
What's the value of understanding history? And I want to, certainly locate it within the context of Black history. And let me be very specific. Black history in the United States or in the earlier colonial life into the 18th and 19th century and 20th century, and now the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. So history is very important in so many different ways, and societies all through human history have recognized the importance of their predecessors and what the work of their predecessors might suggest for their present moment. So there's a famous historian named Gary Nash who did work on early American history. And Gary Nash said that powerful people in the present try to control narratives of the past in order to control outcomes of the future, right? And so one doesn't have to look at, ancient Egypt. I could go back to ancient Africa. And in ancient Africa, there were people who were the powerful elements of society at any given time, the pharaohs, the pharaonic and priestly class, and they built great monuments for posterity. So people will recognize their important point in history. They built monuments to the ancestors and recognized the work of their ancestors, right? And so when they built big tombs, they were saying that people in the future will recognize how important I was for this historical moment, right? And then in our historical moment, we recognize these people with these monuments that we anticipate will be here forever, right? So people have always done this. They built monuments to their ancestors in Europe and Asia, Africa, the Americas. Wherever you have a high complex civilization, people understand narratives of history. And there are people who are historians, from Herodotus, who many people think of as like the first, real kind of serious historian, and ancient Greece. But there are people who, even before Herodotus, who were documenting the past in different ways, right? Perhaps not as scientifically done as others. All right. So now let's look at our current moment. Right now, this is October 20th. Is it the 20th? 2025. We have a federal government that has, under President Donald J. Trump, took it upon itself to do exactly what Gary Nash said. Gary Nash said, powerful people in the present try to control narratives of the past in order to control outcomes of the future. When Donald Trump came into office, one of the things he said was that he will intervene in how federally funded museums and libraries and other institutions provided narratives of history. And they came in and installed, for example, in one of the military academies, a picture of the most celebrated Confederate and the greatest traitor to the United States in history, in the military sense, Robert E. Lee, and installed him in the military, United States military library. Again, Robert E. Lee used his resources and military skill to kill Americans by the thousands, right? In a traitorous rebellion. But this is very important, not just to celebrate Robert E. Lee, but to also, in that picture, choose a picture where Robert E. Lee is with an enslaved person in the background, right? That they would take military bases, J.B. Hood, Lee, thinking about military bases that have been named for people who had fought against the United States. And those names were removed. In fact, by congressional legislation, they removed the names of people who had been enemies of the United States. And when you join the military, you take an oath to defend the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And there were domestic enemies to the United States that, as a consequence of the Civil War, you have over 700,000 Americans dead, right? And this is a pretty big deal. And the United States came to its senses, took down the names of those people who were traitors to their country. And Trump came in and said, no, we're going to reinstall those names. And because congressional law said that you can't have the names of these traitors who've risen to kill and destroy America and Americans, they found other veterans that happen to have the same last name. So they found someone with the last name Lee, and find someone with the last name Hood, and find someone with the last name. And so what they've been able to do is circumvent this. But again, the point of this is that history is very important for people who are powerful in the present. And the reason Nazis burned books, the reason Nazis created certain narratives around German history is because they want to influence outcomes of the future. The reason Confederates after the Civil War, created a alternative history. And I don't use the term revisionist history, because history is always in the process of being revised, and it's okay to revise history. Famous historian W.E.B. Du Bois was a revisionist in history. He found those narratives that celebrated the Confederacy, that celebrated the slave-holding South. The enslavers of the South who had been in hagiographic memory have been changed in Du Bois's narratives. His book on Black Reconstruction was a revisionist take, and it was well received, and is the dominant narrative in history now. So all that's to say that history is very important. There's never been a point in any complex state of civilization where history has not been present and recognized by the people, whether you have trained historians or not. But people have always understood the importance of their ancestors, the work leading up to the present. That's a very long answer. So I promise to be much more succinct next time.
No, that's okay. No. I think what you have lifted and raised is one of the things I wanted to center on in our conversation. If in fact our job, at least in part, what has fascinated me about history is that to find out about things that I didn't know, or I didn't know a whole lot about, and then to discover that things existed before me, right? Mm-hmm. So that what I think, or what I could speculate to have been the first to have ever thought the thing, I found out, one, no, that there have been others who have thought the thing and done the thing, and secondly, did it, accomplished it, and died and had been long gone. And then you look back to see, because you got the vantage point of the future looking at the past, right? Or the current, the present looking at the past, understanding that there's a future that you see, and that you see that the through line for it. So, for example, 1791, there were Maroons and other formerly enslaved and are enslaved, recently liberating individuals in the island of Hispaniola. We now call it Haiti, the island of Haiti, half, and then the Dominican Republic, the other half of the island. And 1791, there were a man and a woman who was faith leaders, spiritual folk, Duty Bookman and Cecile Fatima. And they called I'm going to call it a prayer meeting. And in that prayer meeting where they sang and danced and provided spiritual nurturing care, it was that is now marked as the beginning of the Haitian Revolution that ended in 1804 with Haiti becoming ruled by those formerly enslaved folk, right? Those Black folk. It is said now historically to be the second in self-installed democracy. And I'm putting quotes around that because we've been mining a bit of this history out to find out that what we call democracy may not have ever been quite the democracy we thought. However, but to know that, and to know the importance of faith for people like me and others has been life-giving, so that what my inclinations have been are now confirmed by a fact of history. In this place, I feel very much like, I ask people, do you know in Connecticut there's a town named after a Black man? And what that Black man did 200 years ago, for example. And people go like, no, but there is a town that was named after a Black guy. That dude 200 years ago sued for voting rights, sued the Connecticut state legislature, the state assembly, lost, of course, the case, and black people didn't get the legal right, black men in particular, didn't get the legal right to vote here in Connecticut until the passage of the 15th Amendment, and it was ratified in 1870. So nearly 52 years prior, there was movement around voting rights led by a black man here in Connecticut. I'm blessed by that information. So that when we talk about the power of the vote, that here in Connecticut, that has a history that dates back 200 plus years. So for me, in this current moment where we're banning books, we don't want to tell, you talk about we're revisiting history. We're actually making history up, right? And not accurately discerning what that history is. I find fascinating, sir. I find fascinating. So,
yeah, I mean, so you have all through history, people have, like I said, people in positions of power have decided to do two things or multiple things, but among the many things they do is to build up their own people, nation, whatever group they identify with in a particular way, while simultaneously denigrating and creating ahistorical narratives for some other group that they don't like. And this has always been sort of a struggle, but people in power in the United States and elsewhere, they have, I think in recent years, there's a professionalization of history. And I think it's much harder for people like, I think, I'll be honest, I think that Trump and these efforts, the sort of intrusion into academia and trying to make universities bend the knee and do and say things that the administration approves before they can do create policies that the administration has demanded, and teach certain things and not teach certain things. This is all unprecedented since the McCarthy era, and so to come in that level, I think that the history will look at this moment much in the way we see the McCarthy era. And someone said before, I mean, even in American pop culture, the heroes are never the people who are burning books. The heroes are never people telling folks that you can't teach certain things. The heroes not the people who are stifling freedom of speech. And so I think that history will remember this historical moment as an ugly stain and hopefully an aberration, and that we will come collectively, I don't want to say come to our senses. I think most of us are kind of at our senses now, but we're fighting against forces that are increasingly hostile to various expressions of freedom and things that are not aligned with the administration's agenda. But we'll see. I think that I like to be optimistic about human society, and I believe that discourse and disagreement are very good things. I think they're good for a vibrant democratic society. And I also think that, and I try to teach my students, that we can't believe things because we just emotionally like to believe it. But historians, we're professionally taught to base what we say on archival evidence and fact. So we can't just make up stuff, but we have to engage this with a professional methodological skill. And so anyway, history is wild. I think that faith is very important when you think about, you mentioned what was going on in Haiti. And I think a lot of times people have sort of overlooked the degree to which our political ambitions have been so inextricably connected to our spiritual sensibilities and how we see the world. And so what happened with the Haitian Revolution with Fatima and Boukman, or Boukman, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. But when you think about them, I mean, from Nat Turner to Denmark Vesey and to Frederick Douglass, who a lot of people might not know how militant Frederick Douglass was, but also he was an ordained minister. And I'm not sure how many people know that he was simultaneously someone who believed that John Brown, who was one of the most fierce, freedom-loving white men that the United States of America has ever produced, that someone like John Brown, who himself was a Christian, himself who prayed, also believed that armed struggle to free people from the thralls of intergenerational slavery, torture, and rape, that John Brown was a good man and John Brown was right and on the side of God, right? And it's interesting that Harriet Tubman also was someone who saw herself as a Christian, saw her faith in the work she did, and also saw John Brown in the same way. And whether you're talking about John Brown or Nat Turner or Dr. Martin Luther King and the peaceful, nonviolent efforts of those who believe that that only certain people will be affected by moral suasion and other people need to be affected by the wrath of the sword. There are people across the ideological spectrum who saw themselves as deeply religious and deeply committed to freedom, and they found different tools, but they again found nothing incongruent with being fiercely religious and also fiercely political.
Yeah, you start talking about some of these folk here, and so, for example, John Brown was born in Torrington, Connecticut. The remnants of the house he lived in and grew up in is still there, and there's a marker that makes that connection. You talk about Nat Turner. Nat Turner got his inspiration. Denmark Vesey got their inspiration from David Walker's Appeal, written in 1829. And he encouraged a woman. Her name is Maria Stewart. She became the first published woman to write and get her speeches and other writings published for political speech. She was born here in Hartford, right? So for me, in many ways, this I'm going to call liberative or liberationist fervor 200 years ago was sweeping in and around and through New England, in particular, Hartford. Man, what was going on in Hartford and are in these places that maybe we've missed, because the Hartford I came to 25 years ago didn't have some of this cooking that I've longed to engage others in and talk through, and what we might be able to glean in digging into some of this history. I'm fascinated. You mentioned Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, the minister that performed his wedding, was right here in Hartford. Frederick Douglass came here and spoke a number of times, and there's a very famous time in 1842, somewhere around in there, where he spoke on the south portico of Center Church. Now, my problem is he was outside. He was not invited to speak in the meeting house. So again, history tells some stories there that we don't have to make up. The young people call it receipts. We got some receipts.
Yeah. I mean, so it's really it's notable that Connecticut in general has been a site for so much in the way of struggles for freedom, and I think you can't deny that it's notable that when Frederick Douglass escaped, he was born in Maryland and enslaved at birth. And from his childhood, he lived in horrible conditions, escaped from slavery, and pretended to be a sailor, and was able to get on a train, make his way up to New York. And within a 24-hour period, he had made himself made his way all the way up, I believe, to New York City. I think he went to Philadelphia first, in New York City, but he made his way up and then went to New Bedford, Massachusetts. So it was in Massachusetts where he was first, and there he was he became an AME minister, and he was sort of discovered by Garrisonians. William Lloyd Garrison was a Boston editor of the newspaper he founded, The Liberator, and an ardent anti-slavery and ardent abolitionist, rather. And he was he and many Garrisonians found Douglass to be a compassionate example of what how horrible slavery was, but also the sort of human spirit that had been stifled by the inhumanity of slavery. That someone so brilliant, someone so smart, someone so charismatic, someone so promising could live a life as a slave. That someone could be whatever brilliance you might find in the human spirit, whatever glow of light you could have in a human spirit could be dimmed by the horrors of slavery, and that people could be reduced. All their talents and all their genius could be reduced to picking cotton, could be reduced to being beaten or tortured or raped, or having families and the sort of bonds that a mother and a child could have, that they could be stripped away and just sold at will to satisfy a debt because someone was a drunkard and an enslaver. And these sorts of things, I think, became sort of animated in Frederick Douglass's life. But in New England, again, this is in Massachusetts, and then through Boston, and then in upstate New York, in Rochester, where he lived. But he did come here to Hartford, as you note. In the 1840s, he came here, and no church in Hartford would allow him to speak. And the center church that allowed him to speak, they take great pride in letting him speak, but not inside the church, but outside. So it says a lot about what Americans think of themselves. And if you ask the average American, they sort of imagine slavery as a Southern phenomenon, but slavery was throughout the 13 colonies. And slavery was practiced in Connecticut and Massachusetts and throughout the colonies, but then in Pennsylvania, in New York. And then over time, you have manumission laws that allow people to free the people they enslaved, and ultimately having dates there to do this by. But this didn't mean that they were committed to freedom, didn't mean that they were abolitionists in general. They still understood and benefited from slavery. The institutions in Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island were tied to the slave trade. They were building ships for capturing human beings. They here in New England, the ships sailed from here. They had clothes that were made from the cotton of people who were enslaved, made at textile mills here in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. They had insurance companies here in Hartford that insured those vessels that carry children and women who were enslaved. And if that child died in at sea, that enslaver could be awarded money because that child was enslaved and insurance was used for that child. So whether you're talking about banks that provided loans to enslavers, ships that were made, manacles that were made in industrialized iron making places here in the Northeast, the biggest industry in the United States of America in 1860 was slavery, and all the banks and all the railroads combined did not amount to the wealth of the slaveocracy or the institution of slavery in the United States of America in 1860. The country's biggest export was cotton in 1860. The most concentrated wealth in the planet was the Mississippi Delta, where most people were enslaved, but the enslavers had such extraordinary wealth that was the highest concentration of wealth on planet Earth. So when we think about this, I mean, this is a sort of history that apparently Trump doesn't want Americans to know. But the thing is that it's not about making people feel guilty. It's not making white people feel guilty because white people can identify with those people like William Lloyd Garrison. They can identify with John Brown. They can identify with Harry Beecher Stowe. They can identify with white people who fought for freedom. They could identify with people who are fighting against rape and enslavement and kidnapping and torture. They could identify with good, moral, ethical white people. So it's not an issue of white people being taught to feel guilty about themselves. They can, in fact, find great pride if they want to think that somehow their worth is tied to what their ancestors may or may not have done. And I argue that we're not culpable. We're not responsible for what people may have done before you were born. I mean, they had no say in any of this stuff, whether they were monsters or heroes. These are things that are out of our control. But how we identify if people want to feel guilt, they can find pride if they have to, right? I mean, that's one of the elements of history is that human beings tend to latch our wagon to stuff that we had nothing to do with, right? Nobody alive built the Empire State Building, but there are people who are like proud of it and they hang their hat on it like they did something, and they did nothing, right? But if you want to hang your hat on something, there are a whole bunch of good white people in human history that you can hang your hat on. You don't have to feel guilty about those monsters who are doing all these dastardly things.
Yeah, and if the truth be told, we are all not just one thing as human beings. We are the sum total of all of who we are. Take for example William Lloyd Garrison. was a part of the conversation about repatriating Black folk, Africans, back to Africa. They started an organization in the mid 18 teens called the American Colonization Society. About 10 years later, that movement had taken off pretty big and was a conversation amongst faithful, clergy and others. Here in Connecticut, by mid to late 1820s, the Connecticut Colonization Society got started. And today, we know that movement helped to start and repatriate American Africans, or Africans born in America, repatriate them back to Africa, and the country now of Liberia was formed out of it. Was it a good thing? And were people involved in the ACS's movement? Was it really altruism that led them? The jury is still probably out, but many would say no. They wanted to get rid of, put Black people, take Africans back to Africa, so that this mission could be on the hill. So I raised that to say that we can change. We can change our minds. William Lloyd Garrison, Joel Halls, who was the pastor of Center Church from that period of time into the beginning and the Civil War, for that period of time, Center Church had one pastor here in Hartford, and he was engaged in that conversation and went from a supporter of the ACS to someone who said, yeah, I'm not going to support that any longer. I'm for something else. I think we can't just be judged by one thing. We can change.
Yeah, it's very true. I think everyone's hero in history. I don't think there's anyone that is anybody's hero who was ideologically static. You can name anybody. And I love this quote from Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who lived for 95 years. So he lived long enough to actually see Frederick Douglass speak live in 1893, right? So he was a young man and he got a chance to actually see Frederick Douglass. And Du Bois lived as an adult to be able to see Frederick Douglass live, who was enslaved and then freed and became an abolitionist and then recruited for the Civil War and then an ambassador and all these other things. He got a chance to see Frederick Douglass live, and he didn't die until the day before the March on Washington. And literally, Du Bois was alive long enough to talk to everyone from Frederick Douglass to Angela Davis, who's still alive right now, right? And who was an activist while they were adults, right? Like he didn't speak to her, as far as I know, but he lived long enough that he could have spoken to both Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, as well as John Lewis and Angela Davis, right? Or Andy Young so while people were at the activist movement. So, but this is what Du Bois said. He said, in the course of my life, and you look back over what I've done and what I've said, know that while my positions may not always have been right, my heart was always directed in the right place. And so he understood that, there are things I said when I was younger that I don't agree with, but his heart was always about the advancement of freedom, the advancement of opportunities, like fighting against oppression and that kind of thing. And sometimes his positions had to be corrected as he thought they needed to be corrected. And even, Frederick Douglass was a Garrisonian at one point. Then he broke away from Garrison and went his own way. So he was ideologically changing. Douglass refused to entertain the idea that Black people should leave the United States and go either to Canada, Africa, or the Caribbean. But when things got so bad in the 1850s, leading up to the Civil War, he was like, this is so bad here. We have anti-Black mobs here in Hartford. There was an anti-Black riot here. There were anti-Black mobs, of course, in all these cities across the Northeast. There were hostile laws that prevented people from voting, prevented people from going to school. They prevented people from testifying in court. So he's witnessing the increasing rapacity of racism in the United States. And then the Fugitive Slave Laws passed in 1850. and Frederick Douglass, who had long been a proponent of Black people staying in the United States, fighting for democracy, freedom, and justice and citizenship in the United States, even he was willing to say, you know what, maybe we should consider going somewhere else. At least some of us, if y'all want to leave, I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm not going to insist that y'all stay here. And the Civil War, is that when the Civil War started to happen and these southern states start seceding, he was like, this is our opportunity to destroy slavery. And he put all of his energy into it. So yeah, and then I could talk about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was someone who was arguing that Black people should be sent out of the United States as late as 1862. And so the president of the United States, even Honest Abe, was a proponent not only of white supremacy, not only of the subjugation of Black people, but of course sending Black people out of the United States. But even he could change. Even he could get to the point where he could say, I believe that Black men should have the right to vote. And so you get a chance. You have to give people grace, and also understand that people can grow, change, evolve, and that kind of
thing. And that's the beautiful and the beautiful thing about history, and the gift history gives us. It gives us the opportunity to track the trajectory of a person or a group of people or a period of time over time, so that you can then you could posit what may have been the factors that led the trajectory one way or the other, how that then, has anything to do with what we grew up in and what we were raised in that then has changed. Because I would say, just like Dr. Dupos, we're in a very interesting time, all right? I remember a time that we didn't have no microwave ovens. I remember times when we didn't have no cell phones. There wasn't no cell phones. When the dinosaurs roamed the earth. But to have seen what AI does today, and our ability to access whole libraries in our hand, right? Or by the devices we're talking to and sharing in this conversation today. When I was born, may have been in existence. There may have been people positing this, but certainly the tricorder of Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry now lives as a real thing, where we're able to have conversation by our hands, unwired, if you will. It is the trajectory of growth and technology and use of technology for human flourishing and advancing. I think we're in one of those times now. I'm able to look back and talk about my mother who pursued education. She was able to tell my children, her grandchildren, how she learned to read and write by the fire of the fireplace in the home she grew up in Waynesboro, Mississippi, right? And she was able to tell those stories of her youth and how, and the position of education and learning to read, what it meant, for her and her family. And of course, coming to me and my sibling and then our children today. And now I'm a grandfather. So now I get to tell that story to my granddaughter, who is now in her second year of college. So history is very important. And so to have this current administration begin by saying we need to get rid of some stuff, erasing history, hearkening back to the 1930s in recent human history. I'm thinking about doing the early, right as the Third Reich began to assume power in Germany. One of the first things they did is they went and burned books at the Institute of Sexual Science. Interesting to me how authoritarianism and fascism, one of the goals there, one of the things they really do believe it is to One, talk about national greatness, right? That talk through a kind of purity, right? That we're the best. Let's make America great again. National innocence. The strict gender roles. So this idea of the trans conversation and how that's coming out, and then the vilification of opposition. Anybody that has a different kind of opinion or idea. These are all hallmarks of how authoritarianism rules, this erasing of history. I've been fascinated with Jason Stanley's writings over the last, over this summer. That was my summer read, was some of his work in particular. Thinking about that in the context of what we're dealing with now, banning books and all the stuff that's being talked about. And I like you work in higher ed, and we're having these conversations in real time, and how the importance now of not only what has been written, but what we are able to share. Because I think in for real, if we don't share it, it may not be here for us to share.
I mean, certainly there are people who want that, right? And I think, history is a powerful tool for us to, imagine strategies, tactics, successes, failures, to contextualize our historical moment, the human condition, and that kind of thing. But we all live in our historical moment, which is unique. And these historical moments, what the United States looks like right now in 2025 is very different than any society anywhere in the past. Even if we think it looks the same, it doesn't, right? And so we have a very different set of dynamics, different demographics, the poverty levels, the literacy levels, the levels of wealth, the levels of access to information, technology, the proliferation of guns, the proliferation of people who believe in justice and human rights, right? I mean, when you look at what America looked like in 100 years ago, you have millions of Americans who were indifferent to suffering, millions of Americans who are indifferent to the fact that people can't vote, millions of Americans who can't vote and can't go to school, can't testify in court, they pay taxes to flagship universities that bar them and their children. And so the United States doesn't look like it did 100 years ago. It doesn't look like Nazi Germany. We look like the United States in 2025 with our own unique challenges and own unique strengths. And I think that we have to rely on our unique circumstances for unique strategies and solutions to these problems, because, like creating a new whatever organization, like some people are like, we need a new Black Panther Party, we need a new SNCC, we need a new whatever. The thing is, like, we don't look like the United States in 1966, right? And there's a famous quote, I should get this quote and get it to memory. I think it's Angela Davis or Frantz Fanon, or perhaps both of them have something similar to this, where they say that every generation needs to identify with its own sort of call to action and realize that for its own unique circumstances, and not try to do what people did 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago, but because our circumstances are very different. But history has its utility, of course, in other ways. And I think that when you talk about what we do see with fascism, there are certain characteristics that define fascism. That's very important. So you could almost predict that the state will be used in certain ways, because that's how we define fascism. But also we can look at how you define anti-fascism movements, how you define social justice movements, people utilizing their strength as a people, the Panthers said that there were always more people than what they call pigs, right? And so when they say pigs, they were not always making reference to a racist, corrupt police officer. A murderous criminal with a badge was not their sole definition. That represented what they called a pig, but they also meant people who were in positions of authority and the power apparatus who oppress people as well. So they say if you take the people who run corrupt institutions, and there are those people who do that, and they may deny communities access to food or clean water, or healthcare, right? And those are people who are pulling the levers of power, denying people access to healthcare, housing, education, and that kind of stuff. they said there are always more people than pigs, right? So there are always more people than those who are there are always more people than the oppressors. And that's a very inspiring thing to imagine that, when millions of people take to the streets like this weekend with No Kings. I mean, you have an estimated 7 million people across the United States. Never in the history of the United States have you had as many people come out to the streets to protest a sitting president or a non-sitting president. I mean, never, right? And that's powerful, right? I mean, the people are much more numerous in all times than the people who are pulling the levers of oppression, right? And that's the inspiring thing. And we need to remind ourselves. And I think there's reason for us to be optimistic in our struggles, even in the Democratic space. I believe that I am optimistic. I like to think. I know we have an uphill battle, and I'm one who tends to believe that the people are powerful, and ultimately we can, the people united will never be defeated. It's an old slogan, but I do believe that.
Listen, you talking my language now. I was at the largest of those gatherings here in Connecticut and spoke to about 12,000. They tell me it was about 12,000 people. I was at the mic and I couldn't see all of them. But one of the things I wanted to remind folk is that there is a force, and I said this in part of my remarks. There's a force, a movement moment force. Dr. King called it soul force, right? That's moving us and propelling us, and it's something that you can palpably feel. You can also, there's a wave that you can just sense. There's a vibe. Just young people call it a vibe, right? Mm-hmm. That's urging us, in a way that governments or other kinds of systems just don't have that kind of power. I mean, in fact, what we're beginning to discover and live into is that we may not be able to depend on the power of any government, any organized group of laws and policies and positions. We might have to depend on each other. Novel idea. That our way forward may be leaning on the strength of others in our own communities. That the battle is certainly large in a national context, but that is also as small as your neighborhood and your local town. Certainly living here in New England, if I don't know anything else, I know the power of a town. Here in Connecticut, there are 169 different towns, right? and that's right. We got a lot of towns, and they have a lot of authority. They have a lot of agency, which is for me one definition of power is one's ability to act, or a group of us, our ability to come together and see something happen. What we did in this country, historically, is we did end chattel slavery. It did end.
Yeah,
it took a war, but it did end. Right? Women did get the right to vote. That did ultimately happen. So I too have a sense of optimism, but I'm also fairly, practical, pragmatic. I think it just didn't happen. Going back to that Plymouth Rock metaphor, it didn't just fall down from the sky, right? That we have to work on this stuff, and that we have to have a will to do it. And so for me, go ahead.
No, you're right on the money. I just think, like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Never has, never will.
Never will.
I think people who are oppressors and apologists for oppressors don't like movements that challenge oppression, and they will ridicule, undermine it. They will come up with all these things. And, if we're going to be honest, there's never been a Black leader that's had majority of American support, right? Like, it's never been favorable. every time they had a poll, whenever they had a poll from the time, unless the person's dead, I mean, there's no living person that ever has had favorable ratings, right? Since Gallup has had polls. So you could be someone like Dr. Martin Luther King, who is saying, I believe that America can live up to its ideals of democracy, freedom, and citizenship for the people born here and have constitutional rights. I believe America can be a place of opportunity for all people, not just some. I believe America can be a just place. I believe in racial reconciliation. And I want to realize the ideals of the Constitution. I didn't write the Constitution, but I would like the ideals of the Constitution applied to all people, as the Constitution says. And I also believe in racial reconciliation. I believe in the humanity of all people, including white folks, even the people who are monsters and terrorists and ignorant, backwoods, filthy, terrible human beings who commit gross abuses against people. I believe in their ultimate humanity, and I believe they can be redeemed. And I believe in brotherhood and sisterhood between everybody. And most Americans look unfavorably at Dr. King at every stage of his career. Malcolm, on the other hand, said, I don't have faith in America. I don't have faith in white people. I believe that they are innately wicked, and I want to separate from them. And in fact, if one of them tries to lay a hand on you, you send him to the cemetery, right? And they didn't like him. I mean, so you can't win for losing, right? And so the majority of Americans didn't like either one, and they had diametrically opposed positions. So when I think about, but at the same token, my optimism, the fact that there were people who believed in the possibility of change. They believed that these institutions, the people who run these institutions, that this was not fixed, that this was not static, that we shouldn't sit back and accommodate a system of oppression. But they believe that there were enough Americans who firmly believe in these ideals that we can, as Dr. King said, the universe is, I think he's quoting someone else, the universe is long, but bends towards justice. That when we believe that the universe is long, but ultimately bends towards justice, that this is not a sprint, but this is a struggle that may take years and sometimes decades, and maybe not in our lifetime, but the next. But every step we're moving forward, that I think that this is how I see things. I like to think that even when there are people who don't like the King's Day, there were millions of Americans went to the streets, but there were millions of Americans who looked at that and they had disgust. There were people who thought it was repugnant, people who were angry and mad, and there were counter demonstrators in some cities. That's the nature of democracy. That's the nature of a country as big as the United States. And you took the United States and you could reduce it by a tenth. Reduce it by 90%. If you had just 3.8 million people here, you'll still have people who love and think Trump can do no wrong and think he's the best president ever, and people who understand him to be a fundamental threat to the principles of democracy itself. And that's the nature of it. But you cannot forfeit our obligation to participate in democracy and try to move this country forward. I try to be optimistic, and at the end of the day, I'm one who believes that when Malcolm said that you need a lot of different strategies to move forward, because you have oppression come at you from different angles and different sides. You need to respond with a sort of degree of agility, and I believe that we may have to rely on ourselves. I think you make a good point, but I also think that when we say ourselves, I mean we have a representative, we have public monies, we have taxes, and it's the responsibility of these institutions that we fund to meet our needs. And we need clean water, and I'm paying taxes. I expect clean water. I shouldn't have to go out and get bottled water. If I need protection and honest, responsible, professional police officers, I should have that, with my taxes. I should not have to compromise anything, whether it's education or housing or potholes in the street. So I'm always about holding government's feet to the fire, to making sure the people get what they need and what they want. And sometimes it may be on the municipal level, like you said, with these towns, state level, and the federal level, but we should always be engaged in that, because it's our responsibility and duty. And we control the government. We control the state, federal, local government. The people do, right? And we can't forfeit that or somehow think that the government is its own entity outside of our control.
Well, you just said a whole lot there that my mind started popping off every which way. It was Theodore Parker who said the arc of the universe, the war arc is long, but it bends toward justice. It's been attributed to Dr. King, but
yeah, he always said that. Like he said it, but I think he was quoting someone else. Yeah, and I never knew exactly who he quoted. But
Theodore Parker.
Theodore Parker.
Theodore Parker. He's a Yankee from up here in New England, and my Unitarian Universalist friends, they're applauding me right now.
Nice.
It is he that Dr. King was quoting. I'm with you. I believe that government has a responsibility, right? Not abdicating that responsibility at all. In my humble opinion, I think many of us depended on what I'm going to call electoral politics as our liberative function. The chief way liberation was going to happen for us. Assata Shakur, during the More Monday, not the More Monday, but the Black Lives Matter movement, the kids started quoting a piece from her, and she just recently gone on to become an ancestor, so I think it's appropriate to call her name, Shada Shakur, and she said it's our duty to fight for our freedom. Going back to what you said, that every generation has to answer this question: who am I and what am I? I'm a preacher, so you know the existential questions. I live in the mix of those kinds of questions. She says it's our duty to fight for our freedom. It's our duty to win. We must love, support, trust one another. Right. We have nothing to lose but that which holds us and binds us. Or she said it. We have nothing to lose but our change. So I think that's absolutely correct, and in a way that I want to suggest that, one, you and me got to talk some more, because I ain't got to nothing I wanted to talk about. I ain't talked about your book. I want to lift up this book. Let me get it on the camera. Brother Ogbar, your book. I'm trying to get it so it can be seen. I can't hardly see. There you go.
You got it. Yep.
This book I found fascinating. To as you talk about Atlanta and what Atlanta was during the Civil War. Atlanta was just about completely destroyed. Mm-hmm. Right. It's economic base, its infrastructure, and today it's the Black Mecca. I mean, if you want to do anything, you know, and you're a Black person, you know, down south, you gonna head to Atlanta, and in many ways, I think it is, again, here's how we learn from our past, and again, I want to support what you just said. You know, today is today. It's not yesterday, right? That I think what yesterday gives us are examples by which we could take a look at, pick it out, you know, tease it out, and to learn from both what to do or what direction to go in and what not to do and what direction never to go in. My mama said it just like I think many of our mothers said. She said to me, "Boy, that stove is hot." Now I can believe my mama, or I go over there and touch that stove when it's hot. There are times that stove wasn't hot, and I played in and around it. But when she said, "Boy, that stove is hot," you know, I guess I didn't believe. Here's another saying: I didn't believe fat meat was greasy, right? But when I touched that stove, I learned some lessons, and so I think for me, history stands at the crossroads. There, I use William Hensley's quote: "The straight gate, you know, we are the captain of our, we are the master of our souls. We're the captain, you know, of our way." It is. I think it is important for me and for us to note history as we understand who we are and who we are becoming. And I'd love, first of all, bro, thank you for spending an hour and a little bit with me tonight.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.
And you have to promise to come back so we can talk about. I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about. We ain't talking nothing about the music stuff. Lord have mercy. We got to get down in.
I'm here, and Bishop, let me know when I come back. I'll be happy to talk about the book. Every author is happy about their book when they commit years to writing it, and it's like I make a sort of analogy with like kind of a work of art in some ways, that it's an artistic sort of process that you commit so much to it, you put it out in the world, and you hope that people can appreciate it. And like Erykah Badu said, I'm an artist, I'm sensitive about my ish. And so, I try not to be so sensitive about it, but you put it out there, when people like it, that's even better. I mean, it means a lot when someone more than my mama is reading my book. And so when people say something nice about it, I can't pretend that it doesn't make me happy. So I've been very pleased and grateful that people have appreciated the book. It's gotten some great reviews, and it's done well. And so I'm very happy to have conversations about it whenever I can. So let me know, and I'll be happy to be back on your show.
Absolutely. We will do it. And what you don't know about me is I'm a musician first. That was my career. Songwriter, producer, primarily in gospel music, but I did a little some in some other spaces and places. So we can talk to what you call it. We can talk to ish if you want to. Yeah. Amen. Amen. Yes, hallelujah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Listen, Doc, thank you very much for being with us tonight and chopping it up with me. Look forward to the opportunity we get to do it again. Listen, folks, I'm gonna be back at it. Now I'm a product of them 60s and 70s TV. Same that channel, same that time, right? We'll be back at it again. Follow us on Facebook. We do these shows live on Facebook and on YouTube. Check us out, like us, all the stuff I'm supposed to say. Like us, get people to, share, and more share. And we'll be back at this again, having what we call relevant conversations with me, Bishop John Sellers. I thank y'all for listening tonight, and look forward to the next time we're at it. All right. Peace, everybody.